Good evening, everyone. Happy to see you all tonight. My name is Kirk Bishop. I'm with a firm that works on zoning and subdivision regulations for jurisdictions around the country. I've been, for the past year and a half, been working with all of you and your representatives on the advisory group, the city council, and various boards and commissions to get us to where we are tonight. In terms of the comprehensive update that's underway of the city's zoning and subdivision regulations. I consider myself just a part of a larger team that consists of city staff and the advisory group and the folks I've mentioned before. I'm really pleased to be here tonight. This is the third time that we've gotten together in a larger public forum to touch base. In the past, we've been kind of talking about things we should be doing or shouldn't be doing. Tonight, we're going to try and focus on things that have been done to date. This is kind of a status update on the first preliminary draft of the zoning related regulations that are a part of this project. We're really pleased to have made it to this point. How many of you have had an opportunity to take a look at some of the draft documents and familiarize yourself with some of the concepts in the draft? A fair number. That's great, because really the thing I want to ensure tonight is that we devote the most amount of time to hearing from you. Later in our session, very soon, I hope, we're going to kind of break out, as we often do in these kinds of settings, and discuss things you like and don't like about the way we seem to be heading so far in the draft. But I'm going to give you some prompting by way of giving you a very broad brush overview of what's in the draft to date. And I want to stress that this is one of probably at least 3 drafts that will occur during the process. This is our first cut. We expect to make many revisions in response to the type of comments we've been getting from our advisory group, our sounding board, as it were, touchstone to the broader community, and in meetings like this. So after I give a very broad overview of really what constitutes this initial draft of the zoning ordinance, I'm going to focus on a few issues that have risen to the top in terms of our discussions to date with the advisory group. There have been many meetings to date of our advisory group, 25, some members of a council and mayoral appointed task force that's charged with kind of representing various constituencies. And as part of those discussions, as part of discussions with other members of the community, there are a number of issues that have risen to the top of things that people want to discuss further, and we're going to kind of focus on that. And we're going to try and focus on that in some small group discussions and have you all kind of report back to us on a few things. That's an exercise we'll do here in just a few minutes. I want to remind you where we are in the overall process. We're about a year and a half into a process that we began in mid-2007. We find ourselves at the point where we now have, I'd say, about a 90% complete draft of the zoning ordinance. To date, we've held a number of listening sessions where we've got together in small groups, 40 or 50 odd sessions where we sat down at the beginning of the process before we drafted anything to kind of listen to people's ideas and expectations and hopes and dreams for what we might accomplish as part of this modernization of the city's zoning and subdivision regulations. We've had, as I mentioned before, public workshops. This is the third in a series of public workshops that are scheduled throughout the process. We've had a number of advisory group meetings at nearly every turn of the project. We've gotten together at the advisory group level to discuss initial impressions. There's been primarily through the work of staff at OPG in recent weeks and months, outreach to specific neighborhood organizations and groups. And of course, we've delivered drafts, put them on the website as a way to communicate what's going on with the project, and we will continue that commitment to public involvement and public education and outreach as we move forward in this process. To date, we've delivered the draft in really 3 pieces that we refer to as modules. They cover the waterfront in terms of the zoning chapters. The first module dealt primarily with the basic zoning district framework. What are the available zoning classifications and what might they look like in a more modernized form? The key things that we saw as we rolled out Module 1 was a new organization and format that relied more on tables and charts as a way to convey information. As we move forward, we'll probably try and do more of that. We'll certainly try and add illustrations to the document as we're more certain of some of the provisions are meeting with some level of public acceptance. We've been able to consolidate 30-odd zoning classifications and reduce the number of zoning districts by about 20% as a result of those kinds of consolidations. We've proposed a more modern use classification system and a number of strategic revisions to the ordinance that I'll get into as we get into the key issues phase of this discussion. The second part of the draft that was delivered a few months ago dealt with the overlay or combining districts, the districts that combine with the base residential, commercial, industrial type classifications to modify one provision or another, the parking, the landscaping, and the measurement and exception, the provisions that govern how we measure things like building setbacks and lot area and building height and the like. We've introduced a couple of new ideas for overlay or combining district classifications. They would be techniques or provisions that are in the text but would require at some future point, if they are to be ultimately adopted, that they be placed on the map through the normal rezoning process. So in and of themselves, they would have no effect until they were applied to certain geography in town. They include a new pedestrian-oriented overlay district that might be applied in areas like the downtown or in other areas of the community where there already exists, or we imagine that there could exist in the future, a very pedestrian-oriented development pattern with buildings that sort of hug up to the sidewalk and have doors and entrances that sort of enliven the pedestrian experience and take care to ensure that parking and vehicle access doesn't disrupt that pedestrian flavor. We have created in proposed form the enabling legislation for what we're calling the neighborhood character overlay, which could be a tool that might be available to unique neighborhoods to reflect unique character issues that the basic zoning classifications really can't address. We think that could be a powerful tool that could be used in discrete ways to preserve that critical sense of neighborhood character that people feel so strongly about, and rightfully so, in Missoula. We've proposed the elimination of a few existing overlay districts, and in their stead we're proposing objective standards and procedures that might take their place. Among those proposed for elimination are the enterprise commercial, the CLB type zoning classifications that apply to taverns and casinos and those types of establishments, and the gasoline station overlay. Again, all to be replaced with similar protective tools, but proposed not to be zoning classifications. We've clarified and modernized the planned unit development regulations to provide an additional level of certainty and to try and help ensure that when the planned unit development tool is used, that there are some tangible public benefits that might result. And we're proposing some modifications to the way building height is measured. Again, a topic I'll get into in a little greater depth in just a second. The third and final module of the zoning ordinance portion of the project has really kind of focused on some use and building type specific standards and some of the, I'll use the word miscellaneous regulations, not to say that they're not important, but regulations that we don't necessarily always focus on when we think about zoning. Those include the signs, the nonconformity regulations, the administrative and procedural aspects of how one goes about getting a permit or a development approval under the zoning ordinance provisions, and the enforcement provisions, the definitions as well in Module 3. There are a few new use type standards I mentioned before. Because we're proposing the elimination of some overlay classification, we've introduced new use specific standards that might take their place and offer the same or greater level of protection. We've modernized, reorganized, tried to make the sign regulations a little bit easier to use and understand, and in the process we've tried to include some more modern provisions for things like electronic message centers and changes that reflect emerging technological advances in the sign industry. And so we've introduced an initial draft and we're continuing to work on that. And finally, in this third and final module of the zoning ordinance, we introduced a new concept that we're calling the administrative adjustment procedure, which would have fairly limited application under its initial proposal here. This is a process by which one could request fairly minor relief from expressly identified development standards in the ordinance, and that's something I'll get into in just a second. I'm now going to move to the portion of the presentation where I don't paint with such a broad brush and try and identify for you what we perceive based on the discussions that have occurred to date, primarily at the advisory group level, but to some extent at our regular visits with the PAZ, and our own sort of internal deliberations, identify for you what we think have emerged as the most significant issues that people seem to want to talk about and seem to want to discuss further. This is by no means meant to limit our discussion or deliberation. There may be other issues that rise to the top for you, but in our experience to date, the following are the issues that have generated the most amount of discussion. And so we wanted to, with full disclosure, introduce those tonight and maybe get us to kind of focus on some of these in our group discussions. There are several issues that fall within the heading of density or lot size that I want to bring to your attention. The first is a proposal to reduce the minimum lot area requirement for detached houses in multi-dwelling districts. And I'm using the term multi-dwelling district as a way to shorthand for districts that allow duplexes and or townhouses and multifamily units. As a parcel, okay, yes. Thank you, Roger. The proposal again is to reduce the minimum parcel size lot area requirement for a detached house in the multi-dwelling districts. And that proposal, as I've attempted to illustrate on this slide, would take the existing districts, which require, depending on the district, either a lot size of 5,400 square feet in, for example, R2 and R12, or somewhere in the mid 3,000 range for the higher density multifamily district, and say that across the board, the minimum parcel size to develop a single detached house in those districts would be 3,000 square feet. This is a way to sort of recognize historical platting patterns in the community, a way to recognize and legitimize smaller lot development, and do so in a way that is protective of the lower density, what are often thought of as the single family classifications. This would have no effect on the single family classifications such as A and R1. Yes, sir. I should have explained this chart. It is a poor chart. Across the top, I have arrayed the existing zoning classification names that would be affected by this proposal. R2, R12, R3, R4, B, RH, and R6. At the bottom are the modern day equivalents of those classifications. And much to some people's consternation, we have an R1 under the proposed ordinance that doesn't mean the same thing as R1 under the existing ordinance. I apologize for that confusion, but this does not affect the existing R1 district, the existing A district, the existing RLD districts, or any of the exclusive single-family classifications.
You can just turn them off with a switch on the... No.
Oh, sure, I get the hot seat, right?
Want me to focus on them?
Might as well. Yes. Yes, sir. In this, okay, I'll go back to that one. Maybe that would be better. Yes, that's meant. The question was the significance in this example of the R2 district converting to R2.7 and the R12 to 2.7M. The significance of the letter that accompanies the zoning district name. The significance there is that the R2 district is, for all intents and purposes, a two-family duplex-style districts. The 2.7 allows multi-unit buildings in excess of a two-family building. The M there is meant to denote multi-unit, 3+, as opposed to two-family.
Could I ask you then, when I gave this presentation at Bruce Can Valley, the R 5.4 was 5,400 square feet.
Yes, ma'am.
So the R 2.7 means that it's half of what it was before, right? In other words, it was 5,400, now it's 2,700?
Yes, but it's apples and oranges. The 5.4 remains, and in 5.4, the minimum requirement is 5,400. The 5.4 district, as proposed, replaces the existing A and R1 districts, which, as all of you know, requires a 5,400 square foot size parcel as a minimum. That would not change under this proposal.
I think what she was indicating, though, here you're showing the R2 as a 400 square foot lot. If you apply the same as you do in the R1s that you're changing to an R 5.4, it indicates that you're changing these R2s to actually a 2,700 square foot lot. If you use the same
For a single family house, this 5,400 as today would continue to be the requirement for a duplex dwelling in those districts. 2 times the minimum lot area. 2.7 times 1,000 is the minimum lot area per unit requirement in that district. It does not represent a change other than the ability to put a single family detached house on that lot at a smaller rate than 5,400 square feet.
So you can put 2 single-family houses on what used to be only 1 single-family.
It always allowed 2 units at the 5,400. This does not change that. That's correct. That's correct.
Would you repeat that comment, please?
Roger just stated it another way. It would allow 2 single-family detached houses on a lot that heretofore would only have allowed a duplex, 2 attached units on the lot. So it doesn't represent an increase in the allowable density. I'm more than happy to. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And we consider that, frankly, one of the positives that could come out of this example, where heretofore, by virtue of only allowing a duplex on that, what can translates into 2.7, you were virtually guaranteeing that it'd be a duplex and making fee simple ownership improbable, though possible. So the ability to divide the lot fee simple ownership, I think, represents one of the pros of this proposal. In Missoula, historically, you've been allowed to put 2 units on a single lot without dividing it, if you met the minimum lot area per unit requirement. So you wouldn't have to. You wouldn't have to divide. Well, I don't think you sell it. I mean, unless you do a condominium, but you don't. In that case, it's not likely you're going to sell it. It would, if you were going to sell it, you would have to divide it. I was trying to make the distinction. You wouldn't. It's not a district, nor could it be a district that requires that the property be separately owned. But it would allow that, and it doesn't today. And it would allow 2 units that weren't separately owned on a single parcel.
Really quickly, so the 2.7 means that it will not require 3,000 square foot per dwelling unit, rather 2.7.
No. What it means is that you can do 1 unit on 3,000 square feet. If you're doing more than 1 unit, you got to have 2,700 square feet per dwelling unit. So 1 at 3,000, 2 at 5,400.
Right, so you could have 1 at 2,700.
No, you couldn't. For the reason I just told you,
But
there is
you can have 1 at 2,700.
no, ma'am.
You have 5,400, you put 2 units on it, it's 2,700. It would be 2,700.
But you couldn't have divided the lot in that case. You wouldn't have that. That's all I'm saying is you couldn't have a unit on a 2,700 square foot lot. You couldn't do that because the minimum lot size requirement for 1 unit is 3,000 square feet. There are 2 minimum lot area provisions at work here. Okay, thank you. One more, then I really do need to move along.
Portion is R1, the other portion is R2. And we say some houses that are built on an old single lot, which is about 3,900 square feet, but there's few of those. There are few. We say a lot of what we call a lot and a half, and that's about 5,800 square feet. But there's a good deal of them over there that are built on 2 lots. That's 7,800 square feet. Now, if I were to go over there and buy 2 old houses in the slant street, I'd now have 15,000 plus, so I could build 5 houses, where there used to be 2 houses, am I correct?
If the zoning is R2.7, yes.
5 houses instead of 2. Tear down 2 old ones, build 5 new ones. Okay.
Can I build a
You can do that
fiveplex
now
if
in
I
the
built those
R2.
2 houses now?
No. No, because in the 2.7, the highest intensity building type that's allowed is the 2 flat, or 2-unit buildings. There are building type restrictions that work in tandem with the minimum lot area requirements to help preserve the existing character and intent
Of that district.
We have a lot of lots that are 25 feet wide by 125 to 127. Those translate into, some of them that I'm familiar with are 300 or 3,180 square feet. So each one of those could be.
There's the question I think is, can I combine this new minimum lot size requirement of 3,000 square feet with what has historically been referred to as the boundary line adjustment process and address something? Build an alley house. That's not a part of the proposal that's before us. There are no. This is not attached to boundary line adjustments. We're not trying to reinvigorate past techniques that have not fared well as part of this effort. Lee, is it critical? the amount of the building envelope in 2.7, as it is today in R2 and A and R1, would be determined by the application of the building setback requirements and the maximum height requirements to yield the maximum sort of box that can be placed on that lot. There are no other specific controls proposed at this time. Closely related to the last issue, the ability to put a single detached unit on a 3,000 square foot lot in the multi-unit districts, is a new proposal for the way density for multi-unit buildings would be calculated under the new ordinance. Under today's ordinance, density is addressed in a lot of ways, but when we get to the multi-dwelling districts, those that allow 2 units, 3, 4, 5 apartment building type developments, we regulate density on the basis of the way the unit is configured. How many bedrooms does it have? We have a minimum lot area requirement if it's an efficiency or studio unit versus a 1-bedroom unit versus a 2 or more bedroom unit. It all gets fairly confusing. This is not only confusing, it's difficult to administer because the question of what's a bedroom can sometimes change, depending on who you ask. Is that a library, a study, or a bedroom? We have proposed to replace that bedroom count-based density method of calculation with a single measure, a number of dwelling units allowed per 1,000 square feet of lot area or several thousand square feet of lot area. I'm losing my resolution on this one, but an example, I'm going to use this one because I can see it. An example is the R12, which today, depending on the configuration, the number of bedrooms in the unit, could have a maximum allowable density or require a minimum lot area of between 2,700 and 3,000, is that 3,000? 3,600 square feet per unit. Under the proposed approach, the modern day equivalent of R12, the 2.7M, the multi-unit district, would allow a minimum lot area requirement, minimum lot area per unit requirement of 2,700. We just default in all cases to the efficiency level requirement as a way to simplify administration and comprehensibility of the density-based restrictions in the existing ordinance. This again applies in the multi-unit districts. It is a widely used, nearly universal approach in modern zoning ordinances for what that's worth. And by and large, it works very well in terms of predictability, certainty, and, as I say, ease of administration. Another issue I want to bring to your attention in the interest of full disclosure is the way that some of the single dwelling districts, the RLD districts in particular, I'm going to use those as an example. As we've begun to touch on, the new naming conventions for the zoning classifications tell us by virtue of the R that we're talking about a residential district, and by virtue of the number that follows the R, what the allowable lot area per unit requirement is. When we talk about an R10 district, we're talking about a residential zoning district that requires 10,000 square feet of lot area or parcel area per dwelling unit. That would be a replacement for the existing RLD4 district, which is a district that heretofore has allowed four dwelling units per 1 acre parcel. It was an expression of dwelling units per acre. It is today, and under the new proposal, we're using lot area per unit. We think that's an easier way to think about density in a city type setting where we're not talking about 5 and 10 acre zoning classifications. We're talking about quarter, 1/8 acre lots. But by doing that, when we change RLD1 to R40, 40,000 square foot district, there's a rounding issue. An acre of land includes 43,560 square feet. By using 40, we've rounded down to 40,000 square feet. Now, that's not going to make any difference at all when we're talking about a unit on a lot, but if you got into a larger subdivision, there is the possibility that rounding would result in additional dwelling units being allowed in a new subdivision type setting. So I just mentioned that in the interest of full disclosure, and as a way to sort of reinforce the new naming conventions. R10, I remember at our first meeting, there were some people who thought we were turning the RLD4 district into a district that allowed 2.5 times as many dwelling units on the parcel, and that's really not the case. It's an equivalent district with a rounding issue involved. On the issue of density, we've had a discussion at the advisory group level about the new proposed planned unit development provisions, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but by and large those have been well received. We're trying to make it clear that the planned unit development procedure, the PUD type procedure, should be reserved for fairly unique situations and for projects that really bring about a level of amenity or a level of public benefit deserving of a whole lot of flexibility. In doing that, we've tried to address the amount of flexibility that is allowed in the zoning districts. Today, the PUD is kind of an open-ended tool, and maybe some people's perception is it should remain such. We thought it important to provide some parameters for what's possible through the PUD type procedures, and doing so, we have suggested that the council be authorized to allow an increase of up to 50% in the maximum allowable density. This is an overlay zoning classification, goes through the full process, is protestable and all that. Today, there is no limit on the discretion of the council ultimately to approve a PUD that does anything. And that may be well and good, but as I say, from the interest of objectivity and standardization, we thought some limits might be appropriate. We proposed a 50% limit that caught people's eye, but I think only because there was a number attached to it, and they really, maybe some people didn't think about the fact that this is really a tightening of the restrictions that are in place as opposed to an opening up of Pandora's box of unlimited density in Missoula. So I just wanted to mention that one. Height. Probably one of the first issues to arise in our advisory group meetings was the issue of building height. And because in the first piece of the ordinance that was released, the residential zoning districts piece, we included a proposal to increase the maximum allowable building height in most of the single-family zoning classifications from 30 feet to 35 feet. Now, the reason we did it wasn't that we felt like taller buildings were appropriate throughout Missoula, but because in the same breath, we were proposing to change the way that building height is measured. The way that building height is measured under the existing Missoula zoning ordinance is complex. One has the option of measuring to the topmost point of the building. Here, it's a fairly simplified example, but this isn't the absolute height method of measurement. This is the modified height measure, which measures to the midpoint of the tallest point of the building and the underside of the eave, I think it is. So one has that choice, and it makes some real difference. And I think it was originally intended for the hillside application, and through time it's been opened up to applications citywide. There's also other exceptions in the ordinance. We wanted to, and the advisory committee strongly encouraged us to come up with a way of measuring building height that was transparent and that we could explain to people and that made sense. And we think it makes the most sense to think about building height as the full vertical measure of the building from the ground to the topmost portion of the building, with a few exceptions like for things like antennas and chimneys and the like. But in doing that, we need to recognize that because of the fact that one has heretofore been able to measure to here and put 30 feet of building, that if we use 30 feet and said you had to measure to there, we would be in effect downzoning from a height perspective the existing zoning districts in Missoula. So we proposed a change to 35 feet in exchange for a new, predictable, administratively simpler way of measuring building height. Conservation development, another issue that's kind of tangled up with density. The draft zoning ordinance allows, as today, frankly, for people to cluster developments, particularly in outlying areas and areas where natural resources are present, to say, instead of dividing my R10, my district that requires 10,000 square feet of lot area per unit, instead of dividing that in cookie cutter fashion and trying to maximize my yield and thereby destroying some natural features or not providing open space, to cluster those units in a smaller portion of the site in exchange for setting aside the remainder as permanently protected open space. That idea will live on under the proposed Missoula zoning ordinance, but in a way that I think is even better in terms of guaranteed levels of open space protection. The conservation development option that would be available in the lower density zoning classifications, I'm talking about the 5 acre, the 1 acre, the half acre, the quarter acre classifications and lower, not in today's A or R1, but in those lower density classifications, the conservation option would require that you set aside at least 60% of the site as open space. And if you did that, you get a whole lot of flexibility in terms of the way you configure your lots. No minimum lot area requirement, other than the overall density, which is generally equivalent, and in exchange for such a high level of open space protection, at least 60%, we would allow up to a 20% increase in the number of units that would be permitted in those those lower density zoning classifications. And by and large, people feel good about this. I think they're a little uneasy with the new provisions, but I did want to bring that to your attention. It can result in some very attractive developments that really do a lot to preserve the sort of natural setting that so many of you cherish about Missoula. Lot line houses, maybe in a tie with building height as one of the first issues to emerge, and an issue that still I think is on the minds of many people. Is this an appropriate type of building to be allowed in single dwelling zoning classifications in Missoula? I regret ever referring to it as a lot line house because it does conjure up some bad images in people's minds in a lot of places, and this is a very common technique that has been used successfully in jurisdictions, large, small, and in between throughout the country. These are referred to as garden homes, patio homes, Z-lots, any number of a little more neutral sounding terms. But in any case, for the moment, we're stuck with lot line house. And I want to just make clear a few points. This is a detached housing type. It is not a townhouse. Despite the fact that we use the term lot line, these are not common wall or abutting wall type situations. This is a detached house on a single detached house on a lot. It does not result in an increase in density. One is not allowed to develop on any smaller lots or to develop any more dwelling units under this concept. It came about because of the desire to provide more usable side yard situations, particularly as lot sizes get smaller in more of the urban setting. And it does provide a more usable side yard experience and a kind of patio or garden space you can see here. It results in the same amount of space being between dwelling units than would be in a traditional detached house setting. I'm often asked for pictures of what zero lot line or lot line house development looks like. And the fact of the matter is pictures abound, but they tell us nothing because it's imperceptibly different from any other situation. You don't know as you drive down the street, other than the occasional fence, where someone's lot line is between the side yards. So this is the same type of situation, the same amount of space between houses. You can't put the zero side against something. Walk and chew gum, but I'll try this. And And we think as people get more familiar, as we do a better job of explaining it pictorially and in narrative form, that this is something that people will not be so fearful of. And at least I'm hopeful of it, because I think it does have some merit within our zoning, within the zoning ordinance. We think we've got standards in place to ensure adequate privacy and to ensure that this doesn't disrupt the pattern of neighborhoods. So we'll be interested in your thoughts on that. I was wrong about height and lot line houses. The number one issue that people have wanted to talk to me about was an initial proposal to allow accessory dwelling units in nearly all residential zoning districts in Missoula. As I mentioned to a group earlier today, my phone started ringing the day that the draft was released saying, "What are you doing?" And frankly, the more I talked to folks, the more I was regretful of having introduced it in the way that I did. Before we even got to the advisory group level, we had decided to rescind that initial proposal because it was too far-reaching, I believe, in light of the commitment that we had made to not make this about upzoning or drastically changing the character of established neighborhoods. So we have taken this initial ADU or accessory dwelling unit proposal off the table. It is no longer proposed as something that would be allowed in Missoula's residential districts. We have, however, committed to the advisory group that we might bring it back in a modified form. And our latest thinking, our latest thinking is that when we bring it back in a modified form, it is likely to be in the form of a zoning combining district or overlay zoning classification. Now, the merits of that are that there are, despite the amount of opposition that has been to the initial proposal, and perhaps rightly so, there are a number of neighborhoods who would like this tool to be available to them. And we believe that by crafting it as an overlay zoning district classification, one that requires rezoning and by definition then has the protest rights attached to it, we can provide the tool and we can allow neighborhoods some degree of self-selection about when they want to use it and allow the neighbors to have their say as well. So if it's brought back, it'll be brought back in a limited fashion. It will be brought back in the fashion that many of you have told me that you insist upon when major changes are proposed, that we not sneak in standards that drastically change the lay of the land, but that when we propose a change that we attach it to a process that allows people their day to talk about it. Yes, sir.
To me, it seems unwise to not allow ADUs, given that we've decided on a focus inward transportation policy, which is saying that development should happen primarily close into town so we can serve people getting to and from their jobs and their houses by transit, etc. So this seems to be a good tool to allow for a more density closer in towns.
Thank you. I was thankful that my brother could show up tonight to talk in favor of something. And that's precisely why we're not simply abandoning this as a tool. As with all of the things that we've talked about tonight, we did not in a laboratory back in our consulting offices nor in a secret place in town dream up these things specifically for Missoula or to get under your collar. These are techniques that seem consistent with much of the direction that has come out of the growth policy, have come out of these emerging studies, and that our job is to sort of take road-tested ideas that work in other places, other very desirable places, often very regulated places, and see if we can craft them in a way that fits Missoula and its needs. And I'm still hopeful we can do that with the ADU. I think we stepped a little too far the first time around, and we'd like another shot, and we'll bring it back and we'll talk about it. And by the way, we'll break out and talk about this in just a moment. I just have a couple more focus issues I wanted to bring to your attention. The idea of eliminating the CLB Overlay zoning classification has been an item that a few folks have wanted to discuss. Right now, the only way you can do these types of uses, taverns, nightclubs, casinos, and the like, is through the CLB or CLB1 overlay classification. That's a fairly unusual approach, doesn't make it wrong, but we thought we'd bring back for discussion an alternative, and that would be to classify these uses as conditional uses that would go through a public review process, and to attach to those uses some objective standards in terms of separating them from residential areas and schools and places of religious assembly and the like, and see if we could somehow kind of simplify the process and make it a bit more predictable for all concerned. The same is true of bed and breakfast, a similar kind of situation. Today, bed and breakfasts aren't expressly addressed in the zoning ordinance. They have, through time, been interpreted by a formal zoning opinion as being permitted in some of the lower intent or some of the commercial zoning classifications. We find in a lot of communities that the ability to do a bed and breakfast under controlled circumstances is a way to really help preserve older, large houses and provide some economically beneficial use for even historic or near historic properties. And for that reason, we propose the idea again as a conditional use, one that would require notification, one that would require a public hearing process with standards that are meant to ensure that they don't adversely affect their surroundings. The final focus issue I want to bring to your attention tonight that has emerged is this new idea, I mentioned it before, of administrative adjustments. These are the minor modifications that the zoning officer would be authorized to permit after notice to surrounding property owners and the posting of a sign on the property. The proposal in the draft would apply this administrative adjustment technique or procedure to a very limited range of circumstances. In our new pedestrian-oriented district, it would allow the zoning officer to modify the requirements for ground floor commercial space, would allow minor modifications of bicycle parking requirements, minor adjustments to standards governing non-conforming use of a building to expand into another portion of the building under, again, very limited circumstances. And under very limited circumstances, require that an adjustment be made to the minimum lot size requirements equaling about 5% of the allowable minimum would be possible. There'd be notices that would be sent out. There'd be a waiting period. No decision would be made until such time as people had an opportunity to weigh in. There'd be appeal rights to the Board of Adjustment. We see this as one of the ways we can make the review and approval process a little more streamlined, sort of open up the Board of Adjustment agenda items for issues of greater importance, but then preserving the appeal rights to go to the Board of Adjustment if someone is aggrieved by that decision. Now, what we had hoped to do tonight is have you discuss some of these issues around your table, and we're going to ask you to do just a few things. First of all, select somebody to take notes and report back to us briefly on the discussion. But what we're going to ask you to do for us is, based on your knowledge of what's in the ordinance or what you've heard tonight, we'd like the first thing that you do after you select your scribe and your spokesperson is to identify the two issues of greatest concern to you, the two things that just don't seem right in Missoula based on your understanding of them, the two things that just don't work for you. We'd like you to try and find two things you think have merit, two new concepts that seem supportable in their present or modified form. So two things you like, two things you don't like, to put it in very simplified terms. And then to spend the remainder of the time that we allot to you, which is going to be limited, I apologize in advance, to talk about what we could do to improve upon some of the ideas you've heard about or things you've read about in the ordinance to identify things that didn't make it onto our focus issue list. And when you report back, we're going to ask for your 2 and 2, and then we're going to give you a couple minutes to just summarize the way the discussion went at your table. And our time is going to be limited both for the table discussion and for the reporting back, and I want to apologize in advance for that. But we're going to try and get you out of here as close to on time as possible. So I want you to go ahead and do that. I'm going to remind people or let people know that the facilities are downstairs. If anyone needs to use the men's or women's restrooms, they're downstairs. We have refreshments over here. If you need to run across and get a drink or a cookie, please do so. But otherwise, if you could, as quickly as possible, help to identify the 2 biggest concerns, the 2 biggest things you've heard that you like or you've read about that you like, and we'll be alerting you in a few minutes to the time that we need to conclude. We're going to do this Oprah style. Jen and Lewis are going to go around the room and with the microphone and ask the tables to the table reporters to report out. Jen, you want to get us started? Let's start down here at table 12.
I guess we should start out by saying that our table was rather disappointed at the format because we thought this was rather open public comment, and I was hoping it would be that instead of this, as were many of us. What are the good things about it? That it would be a good idea to have a more transparent code to get rid of the inconsistencies in the existing code and to consolidate the classifications. We also thought a second good point was getting rid of the liquor overlays would be a useful thing. We had more negatives than we can list, but we will hit 2 of ours, and that is that we thought that if the ADUs are applied as an overlay, we fear that they would be used in a similar way as a PNC has been used before. We thought that overlays have been in the past abused, could be abused in the future, and that this would raise questions about both predictability and fairness. Our second question was about administrative adjustments, because you would like to know who appoints the administrative person who deals with this. He would be part of the department, and that doesn't seem to us a very good idea. And even though there is an appeal to the Board of Adjustment, since the department advises the Board of Adjustments, we thought in effect that this would really be an incestuous relationship, so that there would be no independent appeal. And we thought that the administrative adjustments were a way to both circumvent the City Council and remove an effective right to protest. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good, excellent comments. I appreciate it. I want to apologize for the format. I know that it might be frustrating that we don't do it, but the fact of the matter is, y'all are very interested, and we just simply wanted to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to engage in a discussion, and this really is the best kind of compromise. So thank you for your indulgence. Yes.
Our table had some positions that were different than what we just heard, and quite frankly, I don't have any problem with that. I think all of us have the same interest in wanting to protect and enhance the quality of life in our neighborhoods, and I think we're all working towards that. We have different ways of getting there. A couple of the things that we really liked, we liked what this proposal is doing in terms of reducing some of the minimum lot sizes. We think that that reflects both the changes in demographics, the changes in economics that we're seeing that, quite frankly, we can't do anything about. And we think it reflects that. We like the zero lot line homes proposal that makes side yards much more useful to these homes that have zero lot lines on one side. A couple of things that we would like to see changed. while we like the switch from minimum parking standards to maximum parking standards, we think some of those maximums are still too high. We would like to see that tweaked. And we're quite disappointed to see ADUs taken off the table, as they were, for a number of reasons. Once again, looking at demographics and economics. If we are truly interested in home ownership in our neighborhoods, ADUs are a very useful tool, number one, to help young people get into the home ownership market in our costly real estate market here in Missoula. And it is also a useful tool, and it's an aging issue. All of us are getting older. The fastest growing demographic in the country right now is people over 85. Montana is one of the states that has the highest average age in it, highest number of seniors in it. And ADUs are very useful to help seniors stay in their home for a longer period of time rather than having to go to retirement centers. ADUs support affordability. It helps kids get into home ownership and without being underfoot in a primary residence. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Jen, if we could collect the table notes at the end, we're gonna try and digest these, make sure we post them on the website so that people can know the type of discussion that we had. Jen, let's go down here on this end, shall we? Louis, do you want to do that? Great.
Okay. Good evening. Our table, sort of a similar theme here. The two positives we thought were the proposed lot size and density. It's more predictable for neighborhoods, for developers, for neighbors. So we found that to be a real positive. In general, when things are more predictable, it's more positive for everybody. So, overarching statement. The second positive, and we had a lot of both positives and some things that we had some negatives on. But the other was measuring density by the 1,000 number of dwelling units per 1,000 square feet versus the number of bedrooms. Again, that's more predictable, and I think that's going to be an easier format for people to understand, both at the administrative level and again for neighborhoods. The negative, we also thought the lack of ADUs was an unfortunate throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And certainly ADUs, I think, can be discussed. We agreed that there more conversation needs to take place, design standards, whatever that might be. But the reality is a number of people at this table live with ADUs in their neighborhood. In fact, I'm surrounded by two personally, and they work beautifully for my two neighbors. They have single-family homes on the front part of their lot and then have an ADU in the alley. And with proper design standards and controls, they work out really well. The other negative, I suppose I'll summarize here, is I don't quite understand that handwriting, so I'm going to go to the other one. That the zoning code right now actually has no planned neighborhood cluster, and you can throw things at me later or now, but I, again, have planned neighborhood clusters in my neighborhood, and they are beautiful developments. And I have some single-family home developments that I would actually rather see a PNC. What I personally would, there's this conservation district, we're going to allow clustering in larger zoned lots, but not in other places where we can create tot lots or some other green space on smaller lots. So I personally am kind of confused about that. And then the piece that we'd like to add as a focus issue, or to throw out as a new focus issue, is more commercial in every zone. I mean, the comment earlier about we have this transportation plan that's focused inward. Well, why are people driving 5 miles to go get a quart of milk? And part of that complaint was, why are people driving through residential neighborhoods to grab a quart of milk? So we'd like to see more mixed use in every district. Thank you.
We agree with a lot of the things that have already been said, so I'll just kind of ditto John Torma and I don't know your name. About the ADUs, we also feel that that is an unfortunate thing, and my personal opinion is that the lack of design standards is why infill housing has been so unpopular, and that's something that we see missing from there aren't any design standards, and that's something that I want to see in every neighborhood, and especially in the historic neighborhoods. Design standards so that you talk about massing, you talk about scale, you talk about architecture, you talk about materials, and so that when you put something next to my 1898 house, it doesn't look like a sore thumb, that it looks like it should be there. It doesn't necessarily need to look old, but it should be scaled appropriately and massed appropriately. So design standards are something that we'd like to see. Let's see, the ADUs. Also, there's a concern about historic preservation. I don't want to see historic buildings torn down so that you can put the 3 lots that you can now put on, or the 3 buildings that you can now put on a lot. I'd like to see protection for, or we would like to see protection for historic structures. And then we think there need to be more visual aids in the standards, so a lot of it's not clear to us. A lot of this was abstract when you talk about so many square feet, and so just 3D visual aids would be really helpful. And then we're not clear on the bedroom calcs and not sure how whether that's a positive thing or not, because we haven't really studied it, but it's a little confusing to us. And then there was some concern about property values and whether that would be looked at, whether you'd be changing zoning radically at all, or just making it more clear.
Thank you. Did anybody hear any positives in that one? Was there any positives in that one?
Well, I said ditto on what was said
all right.
with the lot
Thank
lines
you.
and the smaller
Thank you. Thank you. Jen, what do we got here? Denise is going to report out here.
I have it. Try not to trip here. Our group actually had quite a few people in it who have not had a chance to read the new proposed regulations, and so they've only heard what we saw this evening. They also expressed some concern about how to find out about all this information. They'd heard about it by word of mouth, but hadn't seen it in the paper. So we talked about ways they can get a hold of that information. But just from listening tonight, they did express concern that this seems to them like a rezoning of the properties in the city, and that it sounds like it's going to increase the density in the city when right now the street systems, transit, and pedestrian facilities are currently fairly dysfunctional. And that also they believe that higher density also generates higher crime rates, so they're concerned about that too. We did have one positive comment at the paper at our table. You talked about the administrative adjustments that can be made by the zoning officer. This person thought that in general, the new regulations seem to have the same balance between administrative and governing body decisions, and actually they would prefer that more decisions could be made by the zoning officer, because as we're growing, there's just so much work to be done, and the more things that have to go to the governing body, the longer all of those things take to get taken care of. So they liked that idea of having that administrative adjustment. That was about the only positive comment that we had at the table. And there was concern expressed about, in changing how we measure height, are we losing the method we currently have for measuring homes on hillsides? So.
I should mention before I forget that the hillside standards of the zoning, when I said we're about 90 to 95%, included in that is the absence of revised, cleaned up, clarified hillside development regulations. So those are still to come. Just want to make that clear.
At our table, we had a good general discussion both about some of the existing regulations and the new proposed ordinance. Our likes included the change in the way we calculate density with lot size rather than bedroom size. That makes a lot of sense, brings a lot of predictability into the situation. We like the 35-foot height, the change in the way that the height is measured. We think that is less ambiguity about how it's measured and is a standard that fits in with most neighborhoods. The dislikes were, and the dislikes mostly we talked about things that are in the existing ordinance. One of them being parking and how, if you're going to have higher density neighborhoods, how you regulate the parking. And one of the, because the higher density implies that there will be more cars, which create more crowded streets, which obstructs the flow of traffic and safety vehicles. And a possible consideration is to look at parking regulations in relationship to what is the available on-street parking. And if there is no on-street parking, then perhaps you increase the off-street parking requirements so that you look at both of those together and shape your requirements around those. And the existing townhouse ordinance was, particularly with one member at our table, something that was not liked because it put stricter regulations on townhouses than it does on any other kind of building type. And that seems contrary to encouraging home ownership. And I will mention that we also did have a brief discussion about ADUs in the context of neighborhood character overlays being able to help with that discussion because neighborhoods can choose to be in or out of them.
Good. All these comments are really helpful. Louis, let's get a group on that side of the room.
The positives we thought were basically the measuring and density, measuring of the density there, and the streamlining of the admin procedures. The negatives we had were with the height and sight line. Particularly, we didn't quite understand how you're measuring it there, particularly on the hillside there. And the other negative we had was with lot lines, exactly what the setbacks would be and stuff like that involved. It wasn't very clear. I think that was all, right?
Okay, two greatest concerns. Someone at the table mentioned that the sign ordinance will be contested by the business community. So I guess you're on notice. Administrative decisions takes a lot out of BOA participation and maybe out of public participation. So there was a lot of concern about how that's done. And how do you guarantee consistency? We need to be shown. And I know today we had quite a discussion about the intent was to use this in a de minimis way for small changes, and yet part of the proposal was that they could administratively change up to 50%. So there's a lot of things that have to be done there, because I know especially with PNCs there was a heck of a lot of problems with that, and that was an administrative procedure. So those are two of the biggest concerns. Two things that we liked or partly liked, especially overlays for use of conservation development, the cluster development in that form, I think would really deliver for people in ways that the way it's currently written and has not been used, by the way, didn't get us anything. So I think my personal feeling, a little bit of an incentive to do that. Whatever it takes to get someone to do that would be helpful. Another overlay that was liked was the rattlesnake sensitive lands overlay. A lot of us here are from the rattlesnake, and I appreciate your rewrite of that, and I hope that that can be maybe a useful tool for other areas that have big environmental concerns in a way to protect them. And other thing I suppose you're talking about is farmlands, things that are, once they're developed, they're gone. You lose the natural function of the land. Pedestrian overlay, etc. We believe that this is probably a good, fair process, gives people a chance to protest it if they don't like it, and hope that you'll make more use of that. Another thing that was mentioned that was people liked the idea of a selective use of the ADU in areas, that neighborhoods that desire them, not the shotgun approach everywhere. So I think it was a good move to not try to force that on people, because again, it does increase the density, and as in the process we just went through, there are places that you're not anticipating increasing the density, and I think so that needs a lot of work, though. To get a general acceptance would be better than to have a war over this thing, because we've had that in the past here with alley houses. Okay, how to improve on ideas in a multiplex? Who gets to vote to create an effective protest? Renters or owners? That's one of the questions. What or how is an overlay initiated? By whom? And I like the fact that you've cleaned up the document a whole lot, and I hope you'll keep working that way, because that in itself will lead to a certain amount of understandability equals predictability in some cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold.
Well, we couldn't come to an agreement on this table, but I had some comments that I'd like to read. Let me understand. Missoula's planning department, with four or five times the number of planners that the city of Billings has hired a consultant for $250,000 to clean up the language of our zoning ordinances. 9 months later, we get this report, which, contrary to the claims that it will not result in a rezoning of property, it is in fact a total rezoning of our community. Billings doesn't hire consultants for zoning issues. They handle it in-house with their 7 people. People bought their homes and neighborhoods thinking they could expect a future of the existing density, the building heights, the open space between homes, views, even fresh air, and are now learning, if they're lucky to know what the city is proposing, that their city government is destroying that predictability behind their backs. We don't want alley houses. The city's been sued over it several times, so why are you doing it now? You say you might remove them from your list in some areas, but then say you'll put it back in through overlays. Why the deliberate confusion? We don't want lot line houses. We don't want what the Missoula Organization of Realtors offers in step back, so a 35-foot wall isn't on the property line, maybe just a 10 or 20-foot wall. We want grass and fresh air between houses, not concretes and walls of any type. We don't want increased density. Our valley's smog will only increase with more people crammed into it. We don't want 35-foot high houses, 3 stories high. We want more restrictions on casinos in neighborhoods, not less. You said you sent out 1,000 postcards and a few hundred emails to a population of 62,000 people. Here's the card that went out, and there's nothing. No, I did say I'm talking me because we didn't come to any conclusion. I'm not speaking on the behalf of the table. we decided that we didn't have anything to say we couldn't agree on. So we agreed that I can read this as my paper. It's not representing the tape. There are many, what I'm trying to say is there are many people in Missoula that believe this. They don't know about it, but let me finish it. You sent out 1,000 postcards and a few hundred emails to a population of over 62,000 people. The card that you sent said little, that you sent to a little over 1% of the population. There's nothing on it to describe the destruction that you're planning for our city. Then you hold the meeting in a theater where a sold-out play is going on at the same time with a very limited parking lot. If you're proud of this report, why haven't you put up displays around town in the banks and grocery stores, the post office, with drawings showing what Missoula's going to look like, what Linda Vista and the Rattlesnake and the University area and Lewis and Clark and Franklin to the Fort, what all of our neighborhoods will look like with this increased density. And let's have a community discussion about whether it's what we want. If the other 99% of the citizens really knew about the meeting tonight, maybe it'd be at the Grizzly Stadium. Who benefits from the recommendations? Not the tax-paying homeowners or the renters who want stable neighborhoods to raise their children in. No, as one of the senior planners said, this is not about affordable housing. This is about income investment. So it appears that we've spent $250,000 to turn our residential owner-occupied homes into commercial income investment opportunities for a few people who are lucky enough to have the inside track with city officials. For that change, we'll see overcrowding, overpaving, gridlock traffic, increased pollution and crime, and urban flight. When that happens, the ratables for the city tax base decline, while the infrastructure deteriorates under increased pressure, and Missoula becomes a slum. The Missoula Organization of Realtors and the infill developers who profit in the short term will have killed their golden goose. 81% of your survey respondents say neighborhood character is important. Why is our government destroying it? There's nothing in this report that preserves our neighborhoods. The Study Commission survey researcher said he'd never seen a community where the disconnect between citizens and the government was as great as it is in Missoula. And in a Missoulian interview said that the magnitude of that disconnect was the stuff of revolution. Maybe this document will be the start of that revolution. I suggest we throw the entire report out, let the consultants go back to Chicago, and let our planning staff, our large planning staff, clean up the zoning language as it was intended at the beginning. And let 100% of us know what you're doing, not just your friends.
I guess I wanted to give the other half of the table. That paints a pretty sad picture for Missoula, and I wanted to actually put the voice out there that I think that the time and effort that all of us in this room and the whole community and people that I know and have talked to has been tremendous. And I appreciate the opportunity for other people to come from outside of the city to help us guide this process. I'm a builder in Missoula. I'm involved in the complexities day to day of what goes on with zoning here, and it's an enormously complex issue. All of us in this room appreciate Missoula for what it is. We want to maintain certain aspects of the community and the neighborhoods that we have, and others of us realize that if we continue to maintain what we've got, the status quo that we have now, we'll continue to destroy all the land around us. And we may actually have to feed ourselves in the next 20 years. So the agricultural land that we have around us is extremely important. Maybe even enhancing and augmenting some agricultural land within the city would be also very valuable. Change is not a happy thing, but I have been watching some of the change here, and I remember the resistance that the Rattlesnake had to a commercial development in the Rattlesnake. Maybe some of you in this room remember that there were 5 neighborhood grocery stores in the Rattlesnake in the last 50 years, and one of them happened to come back. and now it's used and is greatly loved by most people who live in the Rattlesnake. So change can be a good thing. We had a 24/7 sawmill downtown that I lived 3 blocks from and heard that noise, smelled that sawdust, and watched those jobs and trucks for 20 years. Now that's gone. And I think the development and the redevelopment of that urban champion site is a really positive thing. I don't want to see knapweed and sawdust down there. So I wanted to bring about the fact that I think change can be a positive thing, not necessarily a negative thing, and we have to look to the future of a lot of people who want to live here or are coming here to live, and I think we need to begin the densification in a civil way to do that. So a couple specific things is I would like to see, if the city has in fact identified main bicycle pedestrian arterials, those are main, million-dollar investments we've made in bicycle ped traffic. I would like to see the city incentivize the development of multifamily and higher density along those bike ped trails. So the developers are taking a chance to entice people to use bike ped trails that don't need lots of cars. I would also like to see a reduction, or perhaps incrementally over 5 or 10 years, a reduction in the off-street parking requirements for those people who do want to try to develop along the bike ped trails. This change to go from parking lots uber alles to a transit system that really works is going to be a really painful one. But we need to incentivize higher densities along bike ped trails, which in the past have been basically dead zones along railroad tracks and stuff. And I think if we could use the city streets for parking, because that's what they're for, instead of create more and more parking lots, because any architect in this room or builder will tell you that once the dust settles, it's about cars. It's always about carcitecture in this town. Whatever is left over happens to be for people, which is ridiculous. If we're going to have people and urban growth and vitality and stores and commerce in town, not in the sprawl, but in town, we'll need to incentivize the densification of people who maybe don't need cars or lots of cars or choose cars, but want to have a pedestrian way to get back and forth. A walkable community is not a bad thing to have, and it increases health, reduces obesity, all the other good things that come with that. And one other thing is, there was a note I had in here about sidewalks being 5 feet wide. For major areas, I can understand that, but for single-family houses and things like that, access, I thought 5 foot seemed a little excessive. 36 inches always seemed to work well in the past. And then the height penalties. The way they've got the height situation set now, it kind of preempts the opportunity for pitched roofs. And it'd be kind of nice to have some architectural flexibility with some pitched roofs and some flat roofs. And if we want to go up, verticalization of Missoula, which I think will be important in the next couple of decades, that the option for having some pitched roofs instead of just flat roofs might be another thing in the height restriction thing. Anybody else at our table have a comment?
I thank you. I'm hopeful that we can get back to our table report out. That was a nice balanced thing, and I want to be respectful of everybody's opinion. It was meant. I've heard it mentioned a couple of times about my Chicago connection, so I think I just need to get it out there. I am from Chicago, but I have officially withdrawn my name for consideration for Barack Obama's Senate seat. I am. Who do we have left? Who do we have left here?
We think some of the positive elements would be, number one, a rewrite that is very clear and unambiguous would be useful to all, both to the development community, but also to the people who live in neighborhoods, so they understand exactly what can happen and what can't. This is a good thing. That was the original purpose. We also think that reestablishing the importance of the Plan Unit Development, or PUD, is a good thing. Up until 2000, Missoula used the PUD exclusively. We built 55 or more developments in Missoula using PUD. We think it's a very good thing. Why? Because neighbors get to have an input. They have the right of protest. So that's a positive. We couldn't get much consensus on ADUs. Some people think that they are appropriate in certain neighborhoods And we would certainly encourage those people who like ADUs in their neighborhood. Well, talk to your city council person. You can always petition to rezone that area. That is not a difficult thing to do. It's just drawing a line on a map. 35-foot height. This is a real problem for the bulk of the old part of Missoula, which is built on the level. It's very easy to measure. 35 feet allows for a 3-story house. Now, Missoula has not experienced very much tear down rebuild as yet, and it may start to occur. And when it occurs, it's that transition period, which can last from 20 to 30 years. And during that time, you have to ask yourself, when you live in that 1922 Craftsman single-story house, if you want to be boxed in with 3-story houses on either side of you. That's a real problem. Small lots, less than 3,000 square feet, in parts of town that are currently zoned for that's perfectly adequate. There's no problem there. But people who live in those areas where you really don't have that kind of density, and that's R2, people who live in R2 or B zones, you need to watch that very carefully to see what could happen in your neighborhood. Tear down 2, build 5. Maybe you want it, maybe not. Bed and breakfast in all residential neighborhoods, there may be some question on that. That's certainly controversial. All of the above are not in black and white or yes or no. Some people lean strongly towards one and strongly towards another. But certainly there's a range of opinion, and that needs to be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that all the groups, Liz? Did we catch all the tables? All right. Let me talk to you just a second about where we go from here. First of all, in the immediate future, tomorrow night, our advisory group is going to have another in their series of meetings. Could all the advisory group members who are here tonight raise their hand, just so your friends and neighbors see who's on the group and who's. And of course, as always, the public is welcome to attend. They're in city council. This one is in city council chambers. They usually are. Tomorrow's is from 7 to 9, and you're always welcome to attend those meetings. And as time allows, we are occasionally able to take a public comment at those meetings. The initial draft, city council chambers. As I mentioned on a couple of occasions, I've stressed that this is an initial draft. The comments, the discussions at the advisory group, the kinds of concerns and issues that we've heard tonight and our own internal deliberations will result in us taking another crack at this zoning ordinance draft, and we'll be preparing a second consolidated draft, not doling it out in pieces as we've done in the past. And we'll be delivering that sometime early next year, probably around February. And we'll begin a sort of in-depth public review process, we hope, in February. Now, as for those of you who are not so familiar with it and want to know how you can learn more, the two things I can tell you. One, for those of you who have web access, go to www.zoningmissoula.com, where you'll find a downloadable copy of every report and meeting summary that's ever been held as part of this process on one of the website pages. We do our very best to try and keep people informed about upcoming meetings. It's a good place to stay abreast of advisory group meetings and what's going on with regard to the project. But download some of that stuff. I think or Laval Means, who's here from OPG, is our chief liaison with the city at the staff level. Laval has been very hands-on and instrumental. Call her with questions. Her phone number is 258-3797. the two best ways to kind of stay abreast. We'll continue to do our best to get the word out, and as we move forward, try and use other ways to let people know about this project. We'll continue to try and make this thing more illustrative, trying to bring some of these abstract concepts to the ground in terms of pictorials and other things. We really do thank you for your participation. We apologize if anyone's frustrated by the format. We'll have opportunities moving forward to think about modifications to the format, and we'll do our best to see if we can breach some sort of, yes, Councilmember.
Doing some paid advertisement in the Missoulian to get people here. When I look out over this crowd, a lot of you are familiar faces. When I go talk in the neighborhood, there's a lot of people that I don't ever see at meetings like this that are interested, but unfortunately they don't know really when the meetings are and what's going on because they don't have that internet for saying what web page to go. So, and I was one that was kind of disappointed tonight because I really wanted to hear from every individual for at least 3 minutes what their thoughts were. And I promised I'd kept my mouth shut so I could hear what their thoughts were, and I don't think I got my fill on that. I mean, so paid advertisement in Missoulian, get that word out there. I don't think the word's out there good enough yet.
Thank you, John, for that suggestion, and I do try to give an overview of what effort we make for putting out the word on meetings. We did put a display ad in the Missoulian. We sent out a press release to all the media. We scrolled it through the community calendar on MCAT. We interviewed with the KECI earlier today. There was an article in the paper on Monday, I believe. And so we've covered the, we're working with the media, we're working with the print and television, and MCAT has been running all the advisory group meetings. So if you can't make it to an advisory group meeting, we try to have them there. So that is available also, so you can see what's going on at the advisory group level. They're here tonight. It's going to be running at some point through MCAT as well. And we can always improve on that.
To try to show the pros and the cons. So when you're putting it out, you say, this is what we're doing. But I think it would help people understand that this would change and that would change. And to put up displays in grocery stores and things. Other cities do that.
I think that's a great suggestion. And as to using MCT, as you mentioned, we were here first, so hopefully everybody was able to park in some proximity to the space and maybe catch a reception at the end. I don't know. Thank you.
I just want to restate the comment that was just made about doing a better job in the future of stating the pros and cons of some of these proposals. And as Laval suggested, we'll certainly take that under advisement. Yes.
And at the end there, we had the advisory group put their hands up. I was a little disappointed at how many advisory group members spoke to their table. I was that part of the public, but I thought this was more of a public forum, and it was about a third of the people who spoke were advisory group. So I feel like they may have been directing the conversation here a little more.
It's totally chance.
Totally chance.
We're good at true.
It's not a chance. What the hell? A third of the people talking just happen to be on the advisory group.
I was the only
I think it
one.
might be useful to actually have citizens of the community talk at these events rather than having your advisory group champion their particular point of view. Again, in that they get a chance to do that in a private, semi-public opportunity. This is a public forum, so it might be better to have the advisory group take their turns. Yeah, exactly. And let the public actually get to talk a little bit. A third is not a chance for us.
Okay. All right. It's a valid point. We will we'll try and do that in the future. Well, We have reached the end of our allotted time. I do want to thank you again for showing up. I do want to tell you that I look forward to continuing this journey with all of you and to having an opportunity to continue to improve this draft, and wish you the best of the holiday season. Thanks a lot.